welcome back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 27. In this week's episode, we're talking with certified holistic nutritionist and women's health expert Nicole Bendayan about menstrual health, misinformation, and normalizing a newer narrative. Nicole, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk with you. How's everything going?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Things are going really well.
Awesome. So, we kicked off season 2 of this podcast talking about my experience with hormonal birth control, in part in response to the Washington Post article, which we will get to a little later on, and also because hormonal birth control had a direct impact on my mental health, which is what I mainly talk about. When I was first exposed to information pertaining to mental health, it was such an eye opener for me because it explained a lot about what I had been going through. And it prompted me to kind of start conducting my own research so that I could better understand my own experience. And so I've listened to a few of your other podcast episodes, and something that really resonated with me, I think, about your story, and I guess how you got started, was that you were really into food and nutrition, but you didn't know as much specifically about women's health always. And after stopping hormonal birth control and realizing that there were 4 phases to our menstrual cycle, you started to do a bit more research on your own so that you could sort of better understand your own body. So, can you talk about what that realization was like for you? That something that's so intrinsic to who we are as women, something that we experience, isn't necessarily common knowledge.
Yeah, to be honest, it was really frustrating. And it was kind of this moment of realization that I had kind of given over the authority of my body to those who I thought had my best interest at heart, and to those who we kind of conditioned ourselves to believe had authority, and knew what was best for us, and knew or thought that they were giving us the information that we needed. And it turned out that they weren't, because like you, I had a lot of negative symptoms on hormonal contraception. And when I went off of it, even to the last moment of me going off of birth control, my doctor at that point, my third doctor that I had seen about my symptoms, still dismissed me, still invalidated me, and really told me that either it was in my head, all of these symptoms, or that it wasn't related to the birth control. And so when I went off of it and started doing the research similar to you, I found all of those symptoms and recognized that, hey, maybe this whole conventional healthcare system doesn't necessarily, not that it's with malintent or malicious intent, but that they don't necessarily know or don't have the tools to provide us with the information that we need. So when I went off of it, did this research, found all of my symptoms, and then further from there, going through and looking into my reproductive health and my cycle, finding out that there was 4 phases to my cycle, I was totally flabbergasted because, here I am. I think I'm really well informed. I've been into nutrition and biohacking and all of these things for a really long time. I was going through my certifications in nutrition, and I didn't know even the bare minimum of how my body worked and how it differed from kind of the main understanding of health, nutrition, wellness coming from a male perspective, right? And then going further, realizing how few studies are done on women in hormonal health, and kind of just really frustrating, and, felt like I had to do something. Like I said, I was going through my certifications in nutrition, so decided to really target that in and provide information to other women to hopefully have them not experience the same frustrations and delays that I had.
That's amazing. I think it's kind of one of those situations where it's like you don't even know what you don't know. And
Absolutely.
so there's really not too much that you can do until this information becomes available. And I think that's one of the things, the really wonderful things about social media and the scale, I guess, the audience that you can reach from anywhere in the world with your own perspective and the experience that you've had, like you said, to kind of help other women not experience those same things and to give them the information that you wish that you had. And, I know for me, throughout this whole healing journey of mine, I think acknowledging my own behavior and becoming really self-reflective so that I can kind of understand, where are these behaviors coming from? How can I manage them to kind of best serve me? It's been really beneficial to take away their power, kind of giving these things a name, where, no longer am I just an anxious person, where it's something that's intrinsic to me, but maybe I'm feeling anxious today. And I think knowing where these things come from and why we're feeling the way that we're feeling, it's so beneficial in being able to manage them. And I think it's really reminiscent of understanding and learning more about the 4 phases of our cycle, because there is a reason that we feel so differently throughout the month. And so, can you kind of touch on the 4 different phases of the menstrual cycle? And also, how intent are you, both, I guess, personally and professionally, on catering your life to your different phases?
Totally. I guess I'll start with that because it kind of sets things up. But I love to, of course, tailor my nutrition, fitness, lifestyle, and everything else to my cycle. But like you were mentioning, it really enables us to really focus in on what we're feeling versus having it being intrinsic to us and being able to separate ourselves like that. So it enables us to give ourselves so much more grace and so much more kindness and self-compassion. But also, there's a quote that I love, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's a problem well understood is a problem half solved. And I
Mm.
love that because when we actually understand what our hormones are doing throughout our cycle, we're able to not only be able to give ourselves more grace, but also predict and prepare for what's to come and to set the situation up for others around us as well. I know that I've always struggled with my mental health as well. And that was a huge component of how I felt throughout my cycle because oftentimes, when I was luteal, which we'll get into, I would be really short with the people around me or get really irritated or frustrated and not trust myself because I felt like I couldn't be stable. I couldn't be consistent. I couldn't have this like stability level. So even when I wasn't necessarily feeling those things, it was intrinsic to me. And I felt this immense amount of guilt for why I was acting like that, et cetera. So let alone being able to tailor your nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle to your phases. So you are able to, minimize those negative symptoms and mitigate a lot of the issues that come with it and really support our bodies so our bodies are functioning properly. It just gives us a better understanding of ourselves. So we're able to navigate the world in a more confident and thorough lens, which I think is a really powerful thing. But I can get into the 4 phases. And
Great.
we'll set it up kind of in 4 phase syncing purposes. So tailor your nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle, because there are different cycles that are going on kind of at the same time. There's our uterine cycle, our ovarian cycle, our hormonal cycle, et cetera. But for phase syncing purposes and how it kind of breaks down even better is through these 4 phases. So we start off with our menstrual phase, which is the first phase of our cycle. We all know and love it. This is when our period is happening. And that's actually the start of a new cycle. So our cycle goes from the first day of our period to the first day of our next period, which a lot of people think that the menstrual phase or your period is kind of the end of your cycle, but really it's the beginning of your cycle. Because at this time, your hormones are at their lowest. Your endometrium is shedding and you're actually going through your period. And then when we get into the follicular phase, which is the next phase of the cycle, we have what are called follicles in our ovaries that house our eggs. And as these start to develop and grow, one becomes dominant throughout that one cycle, but it starts to produce estrogen. And estrogen is growing through the follicular phase or being produced through the follicular phase. Then once estrogen hits sufficient levels, it triggers the release of another hormone called luteinizing hormone. And this is what actually triggers ovulation to occur. And ovulation is a peak event in our cycle. And for phase syncing purposes, we like to consider the ovulatory phase kind of those few days before ovulation and those few days after ovulation. And it's really important to note that without ovulation, you're not having a true menstrual cycle. Because after ovulation, what ends up happening is that follicle that once housed the egg transforms into what's called the corpus luteum, and that produces progesterone. And progesterone is the dominant hormone for the second half of your cycle and into your luteal phase. So progesterone will rise after about 6 to 7 days after ovulation is when progesterone hits its peak. Estrogen also like dips and then rises a little bit as well. But if an egg isn't fertilized and implanted, then both estrogen and progesterone will fall, and that will trigger a new cycle to begin.
Wow. It's amazing to hear, an actual explanation of, like, the different phases and everything that happens throughout your cycle, because even, when I was younger, like, in health class and things like that, the explanation of women's health and your menstrual cycle, I feel like it's so simplified to just, your period. And that's really
Mhm.
all that, health teachers or anything like that talk about. And, even kind of touching on what you were talking about earlier, how understanding ourselves can kind of help us to prepare for everything that we've got going on and even the people around us. I
Mhm.
think in a lot of ways, understanding why we're feeling the way that we're feeling is so validating. And I had a similar experience, when I was kind of starting to realize all of these things about mental health. I had grown up thinking that I was, a pretty positive person and that, everything in my life was really great and, my life was pretty much like everyone else's life. And then, you start to realize these different things as resources become available and you look at it through this completely different lens, which can be shocking and frustrating, but it helps you to understand yourself. And even still, there are times when if I'm feeling a little short or a little overwhelmed or anxious, I can kind of pinpoint those emotions to what triggered me, why I'm
Mhm.
feeling like this. And I think, like you said, it's a problem half solved because I understand now at least where they're coming from, so I can start to take the steps forward, um, to kind of alleviate these issues, to move forward in a healthy way. And I think that's one of the, again, really great parts of social media, being able to put ourselves out there and, to speak to other people who have had similar experiences where, I think especially these topics where there is some research there's some kind of science behind it, but
Mhm.
I think some of the underlying side effects maybe haven't been uncovered fully, or maybe they are dismissed by other people. And that kind of brings me to this article because, like I
Mhm.
said, that was kind of what kicked off this second season of the podcast. And the first red flag for me was the language in the first paragraph. I didn't even get beyond that when I was like, wow, okay, this is a little strange. Quote, young women blaming their weight gain on the pill, testimonials complaining of depression and anxiety. I've only ever spoken on things that I've experienced personally, and I can attest to the fact that when I was on the pill, I was so much more anxious. I felt paranoid even sometimes, and, handling stress and negative emotions was a lot harder for me. And so these first few sentences were just incredibly invalidating. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the side effects that you experienced when you were on the pill, and I guess what the correlation is between hormonal contraception and a lot of these very real side effects that women speak about that were dismissed not only by this article, but by healthcare professionals.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that it's important to bring in the fact that like estrogen and progesterone, which are dominant hormones through our cycle, have a very wide-reaching impact on our bodies. Not only do they affect, of course, our reproductive system, but it's so much further than that, right? They impact our metabolism, our heart rate, our blood vessels, our body temperature, even. And then it also has been shown that they impact our brains. So our brains actually change in volume. Some areas of our brains can change in volume during our cycle. It affects our neurotransmitters, specifically serotonin, our happy hormone, dopamine, our reward hormone, our neurotransmitter, and GABA, like a relaxation neurotransmitter, right? So they're impacting us far beyond just our reproductive system. And so when we start to introduce synthetic versions of these hormones, they're not equivalent to our normal hormones. And the ways that they're working are definitely not equivalent, right? So there's different forms of hormonal contraception, right? There's the combination type, which is the most common type. It contains both estrogen and progestin, the synthetic version of progesterone. And then we also have the progestin only pills, which impact a lot of other things as well. But especially when we're talking about mental health, progestin has been linked to a lot of the mental symptoms that women experience on contraception. And, it has been linked to an increased risk of depression, anxiety, and has far reaching impacts on our systems. And I think introducing anything that is altering our natural state can have implications. But the reality is, especially with hormonal contraception, that these aren't just testimonials. These aren't just guesses or blaming. These are scientifically backed Like there's research studies that show,
Yeah.
and especially with progestin, which was one of my major qualms with this article, was how it minimized the side effect of anxiety and depression so much within the article, when it's actually the progestin link that is related to these psychological differences. So my experience was far-reaching. The first few years that I was on it, I went on birth control when I was 16, and the first few years I was on the combination type, and I think I didn't recognize the symptoms that I was experiencing, or I didn't have the symptoms that I was experiencing until a little bit later on. Um, but like I said, from when I was young, I've had issues with my mental health, anxiety, depression, etc. And a lot of the studies that show the correlation of hormonal contraception, specifically progestin, and these mental health concerns do suggest that practitioners should vet their clients on if they've had a history of mental health issues, because it could impact it. Right. So that was really frustrating. And then I had a lot of other symptoms. I had recurring infections. I got a UTI and a yeast infection every single time, every single cycle that I was on. The NuvaRing is the one I was on. And I had a lot of other symptoms that were really frustrating. I'm going to share some TMI, but I think it's good to let it known.
Yeah.
I bled after sex every single time.
Mm.
And that could have been related to either vaginal atrophy, which has been, in smaller studies linked to hormonal contraception, as well as dryness and low libido, etc. But
Mhm.
the dryness and or vaginal atrophy could have definitely had a huge, huge thing to do with that, because right after I went off of hormonal contraception, all of those symptoms went away,
Wow.
which was really interesting. Of course, I still suffer from a little bit of anxiety, depression, etc. But
Mhm.
in a large part, a lot of the symptoms that felt this overwhelming feeling of I can't control myself and I don't have any control over how I'm feeling, how I'm thinking, all of these other things were very much so related. Also, the physical attributes. I had a lot of inflammation. I had a lot of gut issues. Like I said, the infections, the bleeding, so much more.
Mhm.
So not fun.
Yeah. It's crazy to me. Looking back, I was on the combination pill for 2 years, and I started it a little later, but, I just remember thinking, like, that was what you did. Like, I had a handful of girlfriends, and that was all what they did, and that was kind of the only option that was ever presented to me. And I remember feeling, I started the birth control pill during kind of a tumultuous time in my personal life. And so I remember, experiencing all of these different emotions and just attributing it to what was going on in my personal life, where
Mhm,
it's like, that's why I'm feeling anxious or that's why I'm feeling overwhelmed. But as things started to kind of iron themselves out, I continued to feel that
mhm,
way. And I remember, I don't think I'll ever forget the moment. I was sitting in the car with my husband and I was just hysterically crying, and I had been crying, like, that whole night because we were just having a conversation, and I felt completely overwhelmed, And in the past, I remember feeling like I had a pretty good handle on my emotions, and there was a bit of hesitance that came into play when I thought about taking a pill because I was like, I always felt like I had a good sort of natural rhythm, like I was in tune with my body. And again, even without knowing the side effects, I was like, this feels a little strange, but I guess this is what everyone does. And so I remember, just saying to him, like, I don't feel like me.
mhm,
Like I never used to be the person who couldn't handle stress or used to cry all the time and freak out about things that, normally you can approach kind of logically. And so then that was when I started looking into alternative methods because it really kind of permeates so many different aspects of your life when especially if you've got some underlying mental health struggles to begin with. I
mhm,
think it amplified a lot of that for me. But again, I just attributed it to what was going on in my personal life because I had no idea what the side effects were. Which kind of brings to mind the idea of informed consent, because I've heard you mention that before, and that was eye-opening to me because I remember thinking, "It seems like this should just happen," right? When you go in and you get prescribed something new, obviously, like you said, there's the idea of maybe vetting people also, which I think would be great, even to have a conversation about, your mental health and to speak about, okay, how is this maybe going to affect you?
Mhm.
So, what is informed consent, and why do you think so few women are given informed consent when they're prescribed hormonal birth control?
Um, I'll start off with why I think we're not given informed consent. I think a lot of it leads back, again, I'll reiterate, I don't think it's with malice or malintention. Um, I've spoken to quite a few doctors that have told me that they don't really have much training about nutrition and alternative saying alternative, but it's really the least alternative. But nutrition, there's a recommended 25 hours of nutritional training to become a doctor, but most schools don't even teach that.
Wow.
So they're not given these other resources to be able to provide us with other measures. And instead, they're informed that there is a symptom and here is a solution in the form of a pharmaceutical,
Mm,
right? So it's more so reactive. And in that case, of course, as you know, there's so many women that go on hormonal contraception, not just to not get pregnant, but also for other, pretty much any women's health issue, whether it be acne, irregular cycles, heavy bleeding, painful periods, etc. We're always just told to go on birth control because
mhm,
that is the solution that when doctors have been educated, we're told is the solution to these problems. But it's really just a band-aid solution, right? Um, and then for me, what I think informed consent means. So there's the informed consent of walking you through what the very real and well-known side effects are and what that might mean for you specifically. Like you were saying, to be able to vet somebody and actually inform them of how this could impact them, even so to inform them of like, hey, let's keep track of these things to see if there's
mhm,
any sort of differences after you start it,
right.
right? So actual informed consent about what the potential short-term and long-term effects of this might be, because there are long-term effects, let alone with mental health, but also with bone density and so much more, right? And then the next kind of aspect of informed consent is, are you given alternative resources, right? Are you giving alternative resources to manage menstrual related issues without pharmaceuticals? Are you given resources to let you know that you can avoid pregnancy naturally with 99.6% efficacy by actually understanding your cycle? Yes, it takes a lot of responsibility and consistency, et cetera, but the symptothermal method is highly effective,
Mhm.
right? So are we given these alternative resources?
Yeah, I remember going, to get prescribed hormonal birth control, and I wasn't even offered any other options,
Mhm.
I feel like there, like you said, there's the aspect of informed consent and letting you know what the side effects are, and just, something as simple as that, just sort of a baseline understanding of what you're gonna be putting in your body and some changes that you might notice. But I think, again, to offer up these other methods could be
Mhm.
so beneficial to people depending on their lifestyle, because it does kind of seem like a Band-Aid where this is like the one size fits all contraception, and this will help you with this, that, and the other thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean, one, that it's a positive thing, and two, that it's best suited to your lifestyle.
Mhm.
And I think the only way to really combat that is to put more information out there as we learn it ourselves. And I remember I felt so compelled to start sharing once I started to learn a little bit more about mental health, because I figured, if I had seen this 5 or 10 years ago, what I'm talking about now, would have been a little better off. I would have been a little bit more informed, and
Mhm.
I'm sure you feel, similarly with the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't disagree with birth control. I believe in the access to hormonal contraception. I believe that we should have access, but I do believe in informed consent, that we know the side effects, that we know if it's good for our specific body. I think that was like the third one.
Mhm.
Right? Going through that vetting process of, hey, is this actually what's right for you?
Mhm.
And those alternative resources, then like, yeah, make a decision. And if you choose to go on hormonal contraception, then you're going into it knowing what you're doing, right? So
Mhm.
the actual impacts on the body. The other thing is that, hormonal contraception can impact different things in our bodies, right? So It's been shown that it might change our nutrient requirements. So
Mm.
it depletes certain nutrients, and a lot of those nutrients are also really, really important in the stress response. So that is potentially why some people may also experience that stress intolerance or the inability to
Mhm.
deal with stress. That it also impacts our microbiome. And, in that case, letting me know that, hey, take a multivitamin and take a probiotic, and maybe you can mitigate some of the negative symptoms that might be maybe not directly related to the birth control, but indirectly due to how it impacts our systems.
Mhm.
Right. So if that happens, then we can make an informed decision for ourselves. But it's really unfortunate. I've been super grateful and fortunate to be able to build the platform that I have and the audience. And what that also comes with is a lot of women sharing their stories with me.
Mhm.
And a lot of women sharing how, they felt so lost and confused and they're experiencing these symptoms, but they're told to just stay on birth control or like try a different type or
Mhm.
come back when you want to get pregnant, even though, if you're suffering from irregular cycles or you're not ovulating and then you want to come back to get pregnant, how long is it going to take you to address what's going on once you decide to go off of hormonal contraception, right? Because right when
Mhm.
you go off, a lot of the symptoms end up coming back, the same symptoms that you were experiencing prior, potentially worse, etc. So it's, are we actually able to then be able to get pregnant if that's what we so choose, right?
Mhm.
So, and also, again, with agreeing with having access to hormonal contraception, I think it's really important that some people have access to also going through other methods of trying to heal themselves naturally before getting onto contraception,
Mhm.
right? So if we give ourselves a time frame of like, hey, I have 6 months to a year to figure out if I can manage these symptoms effectively, if I can get my period back, if I can, manage this stuff, then if not, maybe I'll consider going on hormonal contraception.
Mhm.
But for it to be the first line of defense, I think is a huge detriment to women in the whole.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, access is so important. And I think also is information. I
Mhm,
think there needs to be more of a balance, where, because depending on your lifestyle, hormonal contraception might be the best, simplest solution for you. And that's perfectly okay, as long as like you said, what you're getting into when you're going into it. I think that can
totally.
kind of help you to better manage a lot of those side effects and to understand why you might be feeling a certain
Mhm,
way, and like you said, to kind of support your system otherwise with a
mhm,
multivitamin or to kind of replenish all of the things that are being depleted. And, you mentioned building your platform and a lot of other women sharing their experience. And I think similarly for me, that was one of the most validating aspects of starting to share on social media, was just the outpouring of empathy and understanding, I think. Um, because up until that point in my life, I hadn't really had a conversation about these topics before. And I
mhm,
think when you start to put yourself out there and you talk about something that, you've personally experienced that's affecting your life, and then you see so many other people have had the exact same experience, but because there was nothing to connect you, there was no, information out there that made it widely known. It's such a wonderful way to build a community. I think, you feel this camaraderie from so many other people, and it is really validating, and I think it speaks to how important it is to have these conversations. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it's been like for you to kind of normalize this newer narrative, on social media, because I think, it's no secret that women's health is not at the forefront of, the medical field or politics, given this
mhm,
article. And I think
mhm,
just the social conversation as a whole. And, I think with what I do, sometimes speaking negatively about parents and very real unhealthy behaviors is almost kind of taboo or just discounted, that I'm some spoiled kid,
mhm.
talking bad about my parents. But I think when you have so many other people sharing their experience, it's it kind of makes it that much more important. But anytime you put yourself out there, especially publicly, I think you run the risk, obviously, of being discredited or
Mhm.
misunderstood. And so, what has that experience been like for you, speaking about these alternative natural methods to hormonal birth control?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it has definitely been a journey. I started in the women's health space specifically about 3 years ago. And I came out because I learned about phase syncing and tailoring your nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle to the phases of your cycle. And I thought that that was a really cool thing to be able to people. Because, I had been talking to a lot of other women who also knew absolutely nothing about their cycles. And I was like, I feel like this is something that, um, could be a good direction for me to take in my career as a nutritionist. So I started to gain more certifications, et cetera. But then when I started to talk on the matters, there was so many other experiences that people were having of PCOS, endometriosis, PMS, etc. And I really just wanted to figure out a way to bridge it all together and create kind of a platform or a way to make women feel more understood, more heard, more, give them access to those resources. And so that's, I started doing a lot more certifications, specifically in women's health, cycle tracking, et cetera. And then, getting into the alternative contraception as well, doing certifications in that, and then bringing that to the public. And, what I really saw, first of all, was when I started to talk about this, I never expected, to grow the platform that I had. I expected to have like a calm little business. It was COVID time. I needed something to do. And I thought this was a pretty cool avenue to go through. And then about a year into business, I had changed up my programs and I was releasing a new program. So I finally joined TikTok. And I had been avoiding it for a long time, thinking I'm too old and all of that kind of stuff. Oh, it's another platform to have to deal with. So I was like, you know what? Let me just go on TikTok for 30 days. I'll see what happens. So post every day for 30 days. And I was doing that. And about 3 weeks in, I ended up, a couple of my videos hit like 10,000 and I gained, maybe 1,000 followers. And then I posted one video talking about my experience on birth control. Which, fun fact, after the Washington Post article came out, that video that was at 10.5 million was taken down. So that was fun. And it's been up for like 3 years, but decided after the Washington Post article came out that they decided to take it down, which was interesting. Might be a coincidence, who knows?
Right.
But I had that video within pretty much 72 hours had gained I think 4 million views, and I had gained like a couple 100,000 followers, which was wild because I was getting so many messages and so many people reaching out to me and all this stuff, like telling me about their experiences. And to be honest with you, I had run a couple of programs, but then I got really overwhelmed in my personal life. I also wasn't taking care of myself professionally. Like I was working 12, 16-hour days and I was putting my business over anything else. And I ended up getting really, really burnt out. And I had to kind of take a step back for a bit. I was still putting up content, but I wasn't selling anything. I wasn't I was still working behind the scenes and studying and doing all of that, but I kind of took a step back from the business part of it because I got paranoid and I got really overwhelmed with everything. But I remember it was like April and I had just like worked really hard on a launch and it kind of flopped. And, I had just gone through some really tumultuous things in my personal life and I just crashed. And I was like, if I don't like pause, I'm going to quit. And I can't quit because it's obvious that because of how viral my content has gotten and how many messages I've gotten, how needed this is in the world. So now it's beyond me. Now it's like my responsibility to kind of bring it out there. Because it's obviously so needed. Not many people are talking about it. So let me figure out a way that I can manage myself, maybe taking a pause and not relying on it as kind of a business, but more so relying on it as just like sharing information. Because it was like, I knew that I needed to keep doing it. So now, of course, that was like 2 years ago. So I've been working with clients consistently and we're running programs and workshops and everything since then. But it really was that whole thing of I can't stop doing this because this is so needed in the world. And, you know, I guess I'm that person that's going to bring it there, you know? So that really is what keeps me pushing through. But it is really inspiring when I get messages of, hey, I haven't had a period in like 2 years, and after a program with you, I'm now getting a consistent period. Or I've been
Wow.
suffering from all of these symptoms. I used to end up in the hospital 3 times a year because of how bad my cycles were. But now I'm good. And not only do I not absolutely hate my cycle and it causes me so much pain, but it's actually something that I feel empowered by.
Mhm.
So it has been a really, really cool experience. And even through all of the attempts to cancel or discredit me or mislead me or invalidate me, like the Washington Post article tried to do. It just gives me more assurance in why I'm doing it and why I have to keep bringing it and this information to the world.
That's so wonderful. And as a woman, I want to thank you for doing that, because like I said, I wasn't informed on a lot of these different things. And I think a big part of, becoming an adult, I think, and kind of like really leaning into for me, in my personal journey, that independence has just been gathering more information, about my life and the things that I'm including into my life. And that's everything from, mental health to physical health. What kind of food am I eating? What am I putting in my body? All of these different things. And, I love the fact that you touched on feeling responsible to kind of bring this to the public now and how it can be really overwhelming on social media, especially with how content can just go viral overnight. And, one day you've got 1,000 followers, the next day your inbox is flooded and, I've had similar experiences, one recently where I posted a video and it just made its way to the wrong side of Instagram, and, it can be really difficult in those moments, and it was at, I think, like, 700,000 views in a couple of days, and I remember thinking like, "Man, this is" it kind of it puts you in this weird position, because it's like you trust in your own experience. Obviously, you've done the research, you understand what's going on, but to get flooded sometimes with these comments from people who just aren't as informed, I
Mhm.
think what always brings me back is those messages that I get from people and is that sense of responsibility that, despite how difficult it might be, to kind of, look inward and reflect on your own experience and to make this information that even, you with all of your certifications and the work that you've done personally, to make that accessible to people, it's knowing that it's helping people, I think is such a great motivator, and I think that sense of I guess pride or accomplishment that, you can now help other women. You have helped other women to feel better about their cycle and to feel empowered by this thing that maybe at one point in their life was causing them, a lot of heartache. So that's really cool. I think your perspective on all of that. That's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, social media is a game in itself. And I think, especially regarding women's health, because there aren't those, or there's not those resources readily available, or because women's health has been something that's kind of been pushed aside, right? It wasn't necessary to include women in a lot of research studies until 1993, right? So
I can't
that
believe
alone.
that.
And then you look at, all of these other things. So for instance, with brain imaging research studies and articles, that it's 0.5% take into consideration hormonal fluctuations that women experience, whether that be the hormonal fluctuations through their cycle, birth control, menopause, pregnancy, etc. And when we have these research studies being done, they are usually a lot smaller sample sizes. They don't get the funding. So there's a lot of misrepresentation when it comes to health and wellness, that this overarching thing that we always thought, this general knowledge about health and wellness, pertains to us as well, when a lot of the studies haven't been done on us, right? You take into consideration like intermittent fasting. The majority of the studies that have been done on intermittent fasting have been done on men and postmenopausal women because women's hormones play such an integral role in how we respond. And, they are variables that they have to account for in these research studies that end up leading to it being a lot more time, effort, money, etc. That they're just not given, these studies or research. So a lot of the information that we think we know doesn't necessarily pertain to us. And even when we go into thinking about natural family planning, right? A lot of people have a lot of things to say about natural family planning, but there's different types of natural family planning. And because they're all lumped together, it's not effective. If we lump it together, it's not effective because, that includes the calendar or rhythm method. That is not effective. It's like 75% effective at avoiding pregnancy, which is not good. And please don't use just the calendar or rhythm method to avoid pregnancy, because that's the method that you're just putting in the days of your period and guesstimating when ovulation would occur. But then you have something like the symptothermal method that is backed in science. It takes into account your in the moment biomarkers, which are physical signs that your body gives you in response to fluctuating hormones. So if you understand and learn how to observe, track, chart these biomarkers, and then follow a specific protocol, then it's very effective at not getting pregnant. So every time I post something about the symptothermal method or natural family planning, I try to make a distinction that this is not the calendar or rhythm method. This is a specific method that is 99.6% effective. But then I get so much backlash saying things like, oh, but my friend got pregnant on her period. The other methods don't take into account premature or delayed ovulation, right? So it's these lump sums that women are like just kind of thrown to the side, and we're not provided with the resources. And I'm grateful that I'm able to provide these resources in a lot of ways, and I try to do so with integrity and ethics, and try my best to disseminate accurate and informed information. But yeah, the internet is a fun place to be sometimes.
Yeah. It's definitely very interesting. And, I think something that I've heard you talk about that I completely agree with is, you're putting all of this information out there, but it's so important for people to also do their own research, and I think in listening to some of your other podcast appearances, that's kind of how you got started with this curiosity, and then you sort of took matters into your own hands. And I think when you're dealing with mental health or physical health, there are so many factors to consider that, what worked for you or I may not necessarily work for someone else. And I think that applies to a lot more than just the topics that we talk about. Take the article, for example. I read this article, and after looking into, your background and the work that you do and all of the certifications that you had, I felt like it completely misrepresented you. And so I just think it's so important for people to remember in whatever it is they're going through, whatever journey, whether it's with their physical health or their mental health, to take the things that you see on the internet and kind of use it to broaden your horizon where, okay, I didn't know that this was a thing. Let me look into this and see if this is something that I can manage. Let me see if this is something that better suits my lifestyle, and then go from there. I think a lot of times when you put things out there on the internet, especially dealing with topics like this, it's so easy for people to either blindly follow them and then to say, oh, well, it didn't work the way that I thought it would. Or, like you said, to kind of just lump everything together. And it's kind of like this really vague, broad interpretation of it, where you kind of have to push that disclaimer that this is my experience, this is the information that I've gathered, and you can do with that what you will. It's kind of a fine line, I think, to walk sometimes between, especially when you're dealing with an audience that is as big as it can be, depending on how your content gets out there. It can make it to so many different people and have so many different interpretations. It can definitely be a difficult thing to navigate. But I think, despite it all, with all of the support that you've received and the testimonials from different women, it's just recurring how important it is to put this information out there, despite the people who may not, fully understand the benefits of all of this.
Yeah,
Um,
and going off that point, I think it is really important. And the Washington Post did quote me in saying this: of it is difficult with short form video content, right?
yes.
I'm putting out a video that's max like a minute and 30 seconds,
Hmm.
discussing fertility awareness method, the symptothermal method. My fundamentals of fam workshop is almost 6 hours long, right? So how would you like me to distill 6 hours worth of content into a minute and a half?
Hmm.
Right? It like you said, it's these things that it gets you to question something, right? I think it's really
Hmm.
important that we have media literacy, that we actually understand how the media works, between, legacy media like the Washington Post,
Hmm.
how, they're not required to do certain things and to include everything. And they're very easily to able to mislead you, misrepresent you, and totally skew what you're saying, which a lot of media does to push their own biases,
Hmm.
which we could definitely get into at another time. Um, but even with social media, the algorithm works in specific ways. The more content of a certain type that you consume, the more content that they're going to show you in that, because they want to keep you on the apps, right?
Hmm.
So it's important that we use it as a way to, question ourselves and question what we know, and then also for critical thinking, and to look deeper into certain things, and to find people that resonate with you, that are or hope are coming from a perspective that they're ethical, have integrity, and are doing this for the right reasons. Because
Hmm.
unfortunately, on social media, the Washington Post really tried to position me as, what they first said before they started talking to me, quote unquote, influencers of all political stripes seeking fame and fortune, which, if you actually look into my history, that's not at all why I'm here. um, so that's fun. Also, they never talked to me about politics, and politics should have no place in women's health. But unfortunately, we're used as
Exactly.
pawns in a lot of ways. So it is just really important. We have access to all of this information, like never before. And I think on one hand, that's a beautiful thing. And on the other hand, that can be super overwhelming for people, or they can get misled. But it is really important to take everything you're seeing with a grain of salt and look deeper into what you're seeing, and not necessarily take things at face at face value, but to actually look further into it.
And so, what do you think we can do about this? Do you think sort of the best course of action is just continuing as, individuals and using social media to put this information out there? How do we make sure that women are informed about their bodies, that they know about their cycle, and that they're not discounted by healthcare professionals when they go to them talking about all of these things that they're really experiencing?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, kind of on a personal note. The way that I just want to navigate it, because we talked about how fun social media can be sometimes. And at first it was really difficult with getting these influx of positive and negative comments, and our brains naturally focus in on the negative, which is really
Mhm.
difficult when you're getting, like, it doesn't matter if you're getting, you know 1,500 positive messages, you get that one negative message and it kind of
Mhm.
guts you a little bit. But to recognize that we're all at a different place in our journeys. And I think that all needs to be honored. But for me, really what I'm trying to do is continue to practice in an ethical manner, because I think that there's going to be a butterfly effect. And, if I'm able to help one person, then I find
Mhm.
myself successful, in getting the message that I want to get out, right? And I hope that in time, a lot of what I speak about, and I'm sure what you speak about as well, that like it just becomes general knowledge, so that I'm pretty much irrelevant in 2 generations from now. I hope that I am irrelevant, because this is just things that people know.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, I want to get into curriculum and to change it at kind of like that base level. But for now, with the resources that I have social media, and I'm grateful for that, because it enables me to reach a wide audience. Um, and yeah, just like keeping on, maintaining your values and integrity, I think is really important. It's easy to get caught up in social media.
Mhm.
It's also really easy for other people's assumptions of you, or expectations of you to lead you in a certain way that might lead you away from yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and away from, your ethics and morals. But I think over the last, especially, 7 months to especially more recently, I've never felt more sturdy in what I do. I've never felt more confident in what I do, in the way that I'm doing it, and in the way that I'm going to be able to help people, because I feel like I'm doing it in a way that's really true to myself,
Mm-hmm.
and in a way that is genuine and actually is able to help people and support people, and working with things that are really important to me. And I think that, what's important to you as an individual, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, that it's also important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaking and showing people that, you're not afraid to speak, and all of that kind of stuff also inspires others to do the same in what they think is really important, what they value. And I think that it has far-reaching impacts.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when you kind of zoom out from the particular, topics and things that you touch on, you're so right. It's a butterfly effect, not only when it comes to, women's health in particular, but like you said, speaking honestly about your own personal experience. And I had no idea what that could do until I started doing it myself. And I think the more people who do that, especially in today's day and age where you do have legacy media and social media, you have so many different things that are being thrown your way, that I think when you can kind of seek out and find authentic, creators who are doing this for the right reasons, which can be so easily skewed when you're in that position. Like you said, you can kind of distance yourself from why you got started. But I think if you're able to kind of maintain that, to me, I think is the only way that you can do this in a sustainable way, is to be
Mhm.
true to yourself, and to kind of, your motivator is the same as it was in the beginning. You don't kind of allow yourself to go down these different paths that I think a lot of people tend to when they do build a platform and things like that. It's so valuable to have these resources out there. Um, and yeah, again, I just wanted to thank you for doing that, because it's helped me, and I'm sure it's helped so many other women that are now helping everyone else. I imagine
Mhm.
the women now that are going to be moms in the future, you know what I mean? And the difference between what their talk might look like with their daughter one day, as opposed to the one that
Totally.
maybe they got, and how much better their daughter's experience will be as they get older. Um,
Totally.
and I think that's really a cool thing. And I
And
think, but before we wrap up this conversation, I do have a personal question.
sure.
Um, so with what I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the copper IUD? That's what I switched to after I was on the hormonal birth control pill. And I just kind of want to know, as a women's health expert, what are your thoughts on that?
So again, as long as you have informed consent, I'm happy.
Cool.
There's, positives and negatives of anything that we do, right?
Hmm.
With the copper IUD, it's not hormonal,
Hmm.
which is often a benefit, because you're able to actually have a natural cycle, which, helps with our brains and helps with our bones and all these other things. Um, but the mechanism that it works in is causing inflammation.
Hmm.
So if you struggle with inflammation, that could be a negative side effect. A lot of women will experience a lot more painful periods, a lot heavier bleeding,
Hmm.
etc. But then also just generalized inflammation, and then more so inflammation through their bodies that can cause a lot of other issues as well. So I would take extra precaution if you're on the copper IUD to do a little bit of a more anti-inflammatory diet, to incorporate
Hmm.
more things that have antioxidants in them, and things that help calm inflammation, etc. And then also there could be issues with I'm pretty sure zinc could help with a lot of women may experience depression on the copper IUD, and
Hmm.
zinc might help to counterbalance that. Don't quote me on that, but I believe if you look into it yourselves, you might see that that's the correlation. Because copper toxicity could be related as well, that we want to avoid. Also, making sure that your nutrients are good, And, if you are experiencing heavier bleeding, making sure to increase your minerals, especially iron, because the typical woman will lose about 2 milligrams of iron per day of her bleed. So it's important to incorporate extra iron, especially, if we're phase syncing during our menstrual phase, but especially if you're experiencing really heavy periods, to make sure that that's a major focus. And also avoiding caffeine and alcohol when you have iron-rich meals, because that inhibits absorption. And especially if you're getting your iron from plant sources, to include vitamin C, because that helps with absorption. But those
All
are kind
right.
of the little things. The inflammation is really the thing that I'm most concerned about, because a lot of women do experience issues with inflammation, and the copper IUD could contribute to that.
Cool. Wow. Yeah, that was more information than I've ever gotten about the copper IUD. So thank you very much. Literally
Absolutely.
sitting here taking notes as you're talking. But yeah, wow. Thank you for all of the information that you shared, and just for dedicating so much of your time and energy to building this platform and making this information that has helped you in your own life, accessible to so many women. I think it's really, life changing, and it's one of the things that, when I think about social media in general, is still such a positive.
Mhm.
It's kind of one of those, oh, what's the word?
Counterbalances
Redeeming.
it.
It's
Oh,
one
it's a
of the
redeeming
redeeming
quality.
qualities of social media. Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad
Absolutely.
that I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And if anyone listening wants to learn more about the work that you do, or if you have questions about your own menstrual health, be sure to check out Nicole on social media. I'll have all of her stuff linked in the description of this video. And yeah, Nicole, if you've got anything else to say.
The only other thing, because I feel really inspired by our conversation, because I think you're
Mm,
also, of course, doing such incredible work. If other people out there are inspired to take those steps to go on social media and share what value you can bring to the world, I think, that redeeming quality of what social media can help really do, we are those ones that are doing it. I don't
mhm,
know how exactly you started, but I started kind of, I was locked up during COVID.
mhm.
And so it's just having the wherewithal to go and present yourself in a way, and leaning on the people around you and connecting with people like, you and I,
Mhm.
that can help to inspire you to actually bring value to the world if you think that you have something like that to bring. Not saying that everyone has to do that, but I think it's inspiring to hear, you and I can talk about this at the position that we're in now, but
Mhm.
it took us time to get here.
Mhm.
And it took a lot of effort and work, etc. And everyone's starting at a different place in their journey. So whether it be in your menstrual health or your mental health or your journey to content creation or starting a podcast or whatever it is, find inspiration, find people that you connect with to lean on and to inspire you, and to um, make you feel like you can do it, because you can, in all of those different ways.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think that's the perfect way to wrap up this conversation. And I really hope that everyone listening, I hope you were able to take something positive from this conversation. I had a great time speaking with you. This was really, really
Me too.
great. And I'm excited moving forward to kind of dive a little bit more into my own menstrual health, and to take some more steps, I guess kind of supporting my diet. I think that's probably where I'm lacking the most. So that might be a focus for me in this upcoming year.
You want
So
me back, and we'll talk about that specifically. We can come.
oh, that sounds great. I would love that. Thank you so much again, Nicole. And I will talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please be sure to like this video, leave us a comment, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, be sure to leave us a rating. I'll be back next week with another episode of It's Not Normal, the podcast. Bye.